met, my name is Ruth Edwards, Dr. Ruth Edwards. I am work at the Winter Park Library, and I'm new to the club. And I am honored to facilitate our discussion this evening with Barbara Chandler, who is the manager for the Hannibal Square Heritage Center. And Barbara, first of all, I have a question by show of hands. How many of you have been to the Heritage Center within the last year? Oh, great. Okay. So, and still lots of new information to give, Barbara. So, why don't you first, Barbara, tell us a little bit about the Heritage Center?
Absolutely. So as Ruth stated, my name is Barbara Chandler. I am the day-to-day manager of the Hannibal Square Heritage Center, and we are located in Hannibal Square, right across from the old Dexter's and/or the Community Center. We are a program of Creole School of Art. A lot of times when people are trying to find out how that relationship has developed, it is through Peter Schreier, who is the ED, Executive Director of Creole School of Art, and in him wanting to provide affordable programming as well as to show and highlight the area's African American community, the Heritage Center was created. He saw a project similar to the Heritage Center, I believe it was in California, and wanted to bring back or wanted to create a project such as the Heritage Center, and through that he was inspired. And so we've been here for about 12 years, and we are a repository for the African American history of Winter Park. So for those of you who have not been here, initially when you walk in the downstairs gallery, you will see photographs and read the oral stories of the residents who have lived in Hannibal Square. And basically you're hearing firsthand accounts of what life was like prior to the gentrification of Hannibal Square, and due to segregation of the area. Upstairs, where I'm sitting now, we also have the visiting collection. This current collection we opened last Friday, exactly a week ago today. It is called Love and Loss. It is photography. It's Cynthia Slaughter, who is a fellow student of Creole, and Cynthia's home during Hurricane Irma was destroyed. It was in a flood zone, and Cynthia was able to take photos of her home. So that is what the collection is around, as well as her mother. Her mother is about 94 years old. She was a celery worker in Sanford. So this kind of highlights it highlights the things that are important to her family, her faith. If you should visit the Heritage Center, the exhibition is here until January. You will see in the descriptions, you will read passages from the Bible. The photograph right behind me, it's a chair with a broken vase, and it says trust. And then she follows it up with a quote from the Bible. So essentially what we are community, we're history, and we are art. We have the different classes here that are held here, some of Creole's classes, the after school boys and girls art class as well. We host different programming, different nonprofit organizations. They're able to use our upstairs space, whether it's to host meetings. And so I say right now, we touch a lot of different turfs, whether it's community, whether it's art, bringing in more of our art community along with what we do with Creole. A lot of great partnerships, educational programming. We have the Hannibal Square walk-in tour. We're going to start that back as our weather is getting much cooler now. And that is with our chief historian, Fairlyn Livingston. And she actually takes you into Hannibal Square and highlights or points out the different buildings, what was in the community prior to what is here now.
Okay, so one of the things about Hannibal Square, well, I will say on the partnership piece, the library has partnered with the Heritage Center on several of our educational opportunities. And so Barbara and I have struck up our connection that way. It's probably been the last, what, 8 or 9 years at
I would
least.
have to say so. Yeah. Yep. And one of those partnerships, I'm sure everybody's aware of the book club, the James Baldwin Book Club. And I think that was, I'm so proud at this particular time during a lot of the civil unrest, what we're seeing in our current state, that we were, I like to say we were in front of that with the
Yeah,
book club and the various discussions, the books that we were reading, and having those tough conversations. During this civil unrest, I have to say, we've changed as far as how we do visitors. Visitors schedule appointments and they're able to come in, of course, also COVID, they're able to come in and view the Heritage Center. But what I quickly saw happen were residents, whether they were residents or people who just know and trust the Heritage Center and wanted to have those difficult conversations as how to engage their families, their children, their friends around racial issues. So we were able to pivot. I was able to pivot to meet the community where they are in this very difficult, traumatic time for many, as to how do we begin to have the real discussion. So I always say the Heritage Center, we sit at the intersection of history, of community, and now also social justice. So we were, I think we did well, Ruth, right, in
yeah,
positioning ourselves that no one saw this. We didn't see COVID. We did not see the civil unrest, the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. But I think the book club discussions helped to prepare me personally for the calls that I started getting and the conversations that I was, the conversations that I had to have with visitors who were seeking information.
okay, excellent, thank you. Barbara, can you tell us about the establishment of Hannibal Square itself, the history
Absolutely.
of Hannibal Square, how it got to be, why it's
What it
there?
is.
Yeah,
Yep. So Chase and Chapman, who were the what do we want to call them?
the
They
founders.
the founders, right,
Yeah,
of Winter Park, and we're talking about the mid 1800s.
yeah,
They came from the north and they purchased Winter Park, purchased land in Winter Park, and created a luxurious community for the snowbirds. Winter Park was established for the very wealthy white to live on the east side, with the very intention for African Americans to live on the west side. And of course, we're speaking of very segregated times. So a lot of them who came from the north, they brought their domestic help with them, whether it be their chauffeurs, their maids, however that looked. However, the West Side residents, African Americans, I think it's the Downtown History Center. They have an exhibit up, and I'm not sure if it's permanent or if it was temporary, but there was actually what I refer to as a blueprint where it was platted with the letter N, meaning Negro. This is where the Negroes would live. So the Blacks that lived in Hannibal Square, they were landowners, they were business owners. Because of segregation, they were a very self-sustaining community, a thriving community. So in that, you had the Hannibal Square Elementary School, you had a merchant district, you had the Hannibal Square, where Dexter's and Hannibal's and all those current merchants are. That was all Black business owners, because again, during segregation, they could not have exchange with the white community. So this is where they occupied space. So you have the school, you had the churches. Out of Mount Moriah stemmed about, Mount Moriah was the first church in West Winter Park, and out of Moriah came the other churches. So just like in any other community, they were a very thriving community, self-sustaining. They had economic power, they had political power, We share the story of Israel Simpson and Walter B. Simpson and Israel. Oh, I'm
Frank Israel.
forgetting. Yes, help me out, Dr. Eve.
Frank Israel.
Frank Israel. They were the first two African Americans to sit on the city council. And that was in 1883, 1893. And since then, as we know today, there has been no one of color to sit on the city council. So again, here you had a very thriving community, self-sustaining, where they had economic power, they had political efficacy, uh, and so the changes, of course, we see the changes, the gentrification that has manifested in this community and really reshaped the structure of Hannibal Square.
Yeah. You mentioned I know there was a grocery store. I think one of the more fascinating things to me about Hannibal Square is in that, what is it, 2.5 square miles, at least
Yeah.
there were 12 churches.
Churches. Yep.
Yeah.
About 3 to 5 mile radius, you have 12 churches in the area. Currently, right now, I am going to say you have about 5 active churches because in the last year, 2 of them sold. 2 of the larger churches sold, Warner Chapel, and then also the Seventh-day Adventist sold.
Yeah, they sold the buildings.
That's right, the building sold. So again, that disperses the community. The thing about gentrification, it it starts to pull back at the resources. So where you had Hannibal Square Elementary School, you no longer have an elementary school. And I'm not sure about everyone else, but I know just about every community I lived in, there's always been an elementary school. And that really serves as one of the hubs for information, for growth, for personal growth, and really creating community. So when those things, the elementary school, those things, those types of resources are removed, resources such as the economic community, again, it starts to weaken the power structure in the community to begin to really flourish.
Yeah. Okay. How did you come to be at the Heritage Center?
Yeah. So my background, this is always a funny question. So my background, I come from a sales and marketing background. I was a stay-at-home mother. I went into the workforce and, I started working I was one of these telemarketers that you would get calls from. And from there, yeah, I tell you, those are the days. And then from that, I kind of launched into more of doing community work, and that kind of fell into my lap. I'm a mother of 3 sons, and in that, I started to realize as a mother of 3 sons, a single mother of 3 sons, I needed to make sure that I stabilized my sons in a community. So that meant me becoming involved in the communities where I lived. As my sons grew older and started to leave to go on to their lives and go into the military, I realized that it's going to just be me. I have to now find a way in which to entertain and take care of myself. So I moved to Winter Park at that time to be closer, believe it or not, to the airport. I was doing destination travel. I would work with different organizations. When these large groups would come in, I would be one of those people at the bottom of the stairs, directing the traffic, that kind of thing. During the summer, there would be downtime. And at the time, again, moving into Winter Park, I started to explore the community. I knew Park Avenue, but I did not know Hannibal Square. So there was an event in Hannibal Square, and walking through, I met Mary Daniels, who most of you all know. And Mary Daniels, I think she noticed the fact that, I looked out of place, or I wasn't one of the familiar faces. And she said to me, you should go into the Heritage Center to learn about the community. So literally, I walked into the Heritage Center and I have not left since. So it was through volunteering here, learning about the local community, learning about the arts community, is where I found a passion and desire again to help in the community. So that's it. I blame it on Mary Daniels. It's Mary Daniels' fault.
So tell us a little bit more about when you on the first floor of the Heritage Center, you
Yep.
mentioned when you come in, you'll see the photographs and hear the oral histories. Isn't there also a timeline?
Yep, that is correct. So there is a timeline, and this timeline was done by our chief historian, Fairland Livingston, and it chronicles the local history juxtaposed of the national history of the African American movement. So you will see when you'll see the I'm sorry, what do we call it when everybody moved up north, the
Migration.
migration.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. You will see those things in the timeline. You will see where Hannibal Square was as an African American community and where that change started to happen when everyone kind of fled to the north. You will see where Alzo Reddick, believe it or not, who went on to become a state legislator, was one of the first African American professors at Rollins, and I want to believe that was 1970. You will see things such as where the Hannibal Square Community Land Trust was created as a way to keep affordable housing in the community when gentrification started. So the timeline was created with great intent, a great work and passion by our chief historian, Fairland Livingston. You will also see in the timeline some of the tragedy that's happened in this community where Phyllis Moore, who was the inaugural manager at the Heritage Center, where her brother, who was a veteran, and he returned home. He was at war. He returned home. He went over to Rollins to visit some friends, and he was arrested. And again, we're talking at a point where there was still sundown, the sunset laws are still in place. You couldn't be on the wrong side of the tracks after a certain time. He was at Rollins visiting some friends, and he was arrested. So you'll read that story in the timeline and how he was arrested, placed in jail, and the jail caught a fire, and he died in that. So those are the kind of real stories that the timeline kind of chronicles as to the history of Winter Park, as well as the national history. You'll see the photographs of when President Obama was elected and how that happened, or the response of the Winter Park residents in the timeline as well.
And then the wonderful statue on the outside of the Heritage Center on the porch. Tell us about that and the creation of it and
Of
the
that,
origin
yeah,
of it. Like, why do
yeah,
we even have that?
absolutely. So that statue is of Tuskegee Airman Chief Sergeant Richard Hall, who, by the way, today is his 97th birthday.
Yeah.
Richard Hall was raised in Hannibal Square community. He now currently lives in Maitland. He attended Hannibal Square Elementary and then went on to Wymore. And that's when Wymore, or Eatonville, it was called Wymore, in Eatonville, it was a boarding school at the time. I know the school itself has transitioned so many times, but he went when it was a boarding school. Um,
You mean
we brought
Hungerford?
in, pardon me,
Are you,
Hungerford, that's it, I'm
okay.
sorry, Hungerford
No,
in
no.
Eatonville. Yeah, that's correct. And so we brought in an artist, as we normally do. The artist's name is Rigoberto Torres. He is a Hispanic artist, and he currently now lives in Kissimmee. And Rigoberto Torres is to create these life-size sculptures of everyday people in the neighborhood. We had this exhibition maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, and we chose someone that we could highlight, and who better than Chief Staff Sergeant Richard Hall, Tuskegee Airmen. Our exhibitions are always on display for at least 3 months. This was a huge exhibit, meaning that it was at the Heritage Center as well as Crealdi. So you can only imagine what it was like for 3 months walking into the Heritage Center of life-size sculptures of people that were going to be, you know, on display for 3 months. So it's done, the procedure is called a casting, and you are covered in the, what I'm going to call a plaster. You're covered in a plaster, and in your mouth there's a toothpick, in your nose there are those plugs, so you're able to breathe, but you're also not inhaling or ingesting any of the materials. And so your body is covered in this plaster, but it's covered in sections. So again, Richard Hall was in his, in his 90s when they were doing this. So for this particular age, thank God he's in pretty good health. Of course, a lot of precision and delicacy was taken into consideration in doing this. We also, around that same time, the same artist, we did hands of community members, a few of the officials, city council officials, where they have adjoining hands, the same kind of technique where you pour the plaster, it hardens, and then it is lifted off of the person or persons in this particular case. So we're very proud to have that up. And I think, of course, it draws a lot of attention. We feel very safe and protected. We had one incident, of course, where someone, struck it or hit it, but we were able to contact Rigoberto, the artist, who lives in Kissimmee, and he was able to come in and take care. This particular artist, his work is also in Brazil. He is an international artist, and you can see his work in a lot of places. So to have this type of work here in our community, I just think it's a wonderful piece.
Yeah. And it is life size. You walk past it, even in my peripheral vision. If I'm driving down the street and I look at it, I always think there's somebody standing on the porch.
Yeah.
We are at the point where we are looking for questions from you. If you have questions about anything Barbara has shared or questions about things she hasn't mentioned, please feel free. So I will, we do have one question about the elementary school. Did it close as a result of the federal order to integrate the schools?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Did Hannibal Square Elementary close as a result of the federal effort to integrate schools?
That could be possible. That is a very good question. And when you pose a question like that, I'm sure that has something to do with it. I don't believe that came early. I know that there was still a head start in the old community center, but I do believe the elementary school was probably part of the integration. I absolutely believe that. What I also believe in that case is that there is, so now currently as we know it now, the students go over to Audubon. They're bused over to Audubon Elementary School. So once again, walking, you're probably looking at a good 3 to 5 miles. And I want to believe the students, pardon me, on the west side, they may attend, depending on where they're located, they may also attend Lakemont, Audubon, and possibly also Brookshire. But I know at least 2 elementary schools. And basically what that says, and if you guys really remember, everyone in your neighborhood always went to the same school.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody on your same street, we all went to the same school. There was really no split in going to the different elementary schools. So I do believe that integration played a great part, but at the same time, I think, again, not having a stable educational facility really changes the construct of the community, because again, this was the way parents got to know each other. This is also the way that, again, information is disseminated, the same information. And this is also a way of keeping the educators accountable as well, and keeping them close to the values in the community. So once that starts to change, again, it just tends to, it can weaken the community. It can weaken the
Yeah,
community from the inside.
right. Because Hannibal Square Elementary coexisted with Webster Elementary, if I
Hmm.
recall my
That
accounting
is
of art
correct.
history. So,
Yep, yep. And we have a photo. And Webster Elementary is where the vocational is. Winter Park Votech is.
Winter Park
What
Tech.
is? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what Webster was. Yeah.
Okay. So, where was Hannibal Square Elementary? Where was it physically located?
Right. So that was across the street in the area where the community center is. I actually
Oh,
met with
okay.
David Johnson. He was a former mayor. So he
Mm-hmm.
also came and gave me some more information as to where the school was located. So it was actually further down from where the community center currently sits.
Okay. All right. And I had another thought. Oh, along with that, Hannibal Square had its own library
That
up
is correct.
until
Uh-huh.
like the late 70s. And
That is
then
correct. Yeah, and that
that went,
building, yeah, according to Mr. Johnson, again, a former commissioner, it was a smaller building. It was actually a building of its own, a smaller building of its own that also kind of sat behind the library. So here
okay.
you have the school, and then the library had its own site. And then later on, the library kind of transitioned into the community center, and so did Head Start. And for the obvious
Oh,
reason, parents need to, Head Start is usually in every community where it's conveniently placed. I think
okay.
Ms. George has a question.
Oh, I had a question about what's the relationship between the Black community in Winter Park and the police?
And we're speaking currently or just
Yes,
overall?
currently, I know you mentioned that one poor guy that went into Rollins and
Uh-huh.
that tragedy that happened. What about today? What is it like
Right.
today? And is there a lot of dialogue between the Black community and the police to
Police.
talk about some of the issues that are coming up all over the
That are
country?
coming up, right? So of course, and it's good that we can always address the elephant in the room. I think it's important. Um, Chief Deal, I think Chief Deal, for the time that I have been in the community, Chief Deal has definitely made his presence known. He's come into the Heritage Center. The dialogue with the African American community and the police, I think that comes through a very various ways. One of the ways is there's an organization that advocates for the West Side. It's called Bridging the Color Divide. And when Chief Deal initially came on, a group of residents, Mary Daniels, Fairlyn Livingston, Elizabeth Swartz, they went and met with Chief Deal. And basically what they wanted him to do at the time, and I'm just kind of going back in my memory, was to, number one, get to know the community. And I wanted, to tour the Heritage Center and get to know the history of the community and what the relationship in the past with the Black residents and the police was. So therefore, they could understand, because we all know the worst thing that can happen is when, whether it's the law enforcement or whether it's a business, when they come into a community, meaning a new person, a new chief of police or a new officer or a new business, and they come into the community and not understanding who or what is in the community, not knowing the history of the community, because we all know in a community such as Winter Park, building relationships and building rapport goes a long way. And it tends to dispel any implicit bias that you may be unaware of or any negative stories or histories. Currently, right now, the Ministerial Alliance has aligned themselves with the police force. The Ministerial Alliance is now headed up by Pastor Troy Eastman, who is with New Hope. So I think that's where we get to stabilize and build relationship with our current administration in law enforcement.
Barbara, does Winter Park have a joint ministerial alliance?
I believe they are working on that.
Okay.
From what it seems, I know that Pastor Dawkins, when he was the head, it was very active and thriving and had a really good presence. But I do believe that they are trying, because of everything right now, that is being revived. So that's a really good thing.
Okay. Other questions, thoughts? Yes, Anne, unmute yourself.
Did Eatonville and Hannibal Square develop parallel or in competition with each other, or just have nothing to do with each other?
Good question.
Yeah, and definitely help me out here. Dr. Rebecca McLeod, who did the writing on the African American churches of West Winter Park, it was in her writings that I saw that Hannibal Square was actually here prior to Eatonville. That's the only documented information that I have seen. Now, Eatonville is known as one of the first incorporated Black townships. So I want to believe, in my opinion, I don't want to say that they did not have anything to do with each other, because what we will find, or what I have found, is that there are a lot of relationships, and also the churches. You would have some of the congregation from Eatonville that would attend the churches in Hannibal Square, or pastors who would pastor also in Eatonville. So a lot of family, I want to believe the Franklins, you have some Franklins that live in Eatonville and Franklins that live in Hannibal Square. So I think it's through those kinds of ties is where you see a connectiveness. And of course, the fact that they were two Black communities, and the values, whether it's through religion, through education. Education-wise, most of the students or resident students who lived in Hannibal Square, they would attend elementary in Hannibal Square, and then they would go off to Eatonville to further their education. Ford High School. So I think that connectiveness kind of thing is what kept them connected as a community.
And I will reinforce that, Barbara. It actually is a fact. Hannibal Square historically was established first, but it was never incorporated.
Incorporated, correct.
And when Eatonville, for the longest time, was say the oldest African-American community in the United States, at some point in the 10 years or longer than that, but since I have been working in Winter Park, they changed that to say the oldest incorporated African-American community. So I think they do acknowledge that timeline-wise, they were established after Hannibal Square, but they were incorporated first.
Correct. Yeah, makes sense, yeah.
And let me get Ann's question, and then Nikki, I'll come to you.
Okay, and Russell had his hand up too. I just wanted to share, several years ago, I went to a wonderful program on the West Side, and it included some men who had gone to Hungerford, who had been boarding students at Hungerford.
Mm-hmm.
And as this discussion, which came first and were they together, I would just invite you to imagine what transportation was like in the 1880s. Winter Park was founded in the mid-'80s. And there was the Dinky line went to deliver fruit from Oviedo to Orlando, went through Winter Park, but there was no established transportation to any place else, except the train, of course. And what fascinated me was that the men talking about boarding at Hungerford said, because none of their families had cars and they had no way, they couldn't go to school as day students. So the way that they could attend high school was to board over there, and then somehow they would come home on the weekend. That gave me a whole different sense of taking myself back to the early 1900s and imagining that kind of life. So that was the only way they could go to high school, to board there.
Yeah. Thank you. Nikki, and then Russell, I'll come to you. Nikki?
I heard there was a curfew still in effect in Hannibal Square for the businesses.
You mean currently, Ms. Wise?
Yes.
So as of, I believe it was last year, we're in 2020, the end of 2020, so 2019, last year, it was voted on by the commission at that time, and I hope we're talking about the same thing, where they lifted that 11 o'clock curfew where businesses had to be shut down. It was lifted and extended until 2 o'clock, if that's what we're speaking about. It did get
That's what
extended.
I was asking. Yeah.
Yeah, it did get extended. It was voted. What started to happen, and we did have residents that advocated against it. What started to happen, of course, why it was in place. Let's talk about why it was in place. So the 11 o'clock curfew, to my knowledge, the history behind it, it was in place because at one particular point, Hannibal Square, the businesses, the bars, let me just say, when African Americans occupied that space, there were brawls that would happen in any town or any bar after you had too much. So I believe at that point is when, right? I believe at that particular point is when a curfew was in place. A curfew was also in place because Hannibal Square is residential. It is a residential community. You have people that live on top of the businesses. You have the streets right behind of it. So of course, to respect your neighbors, to be a respectful community, and to keep some sort of order and a semblance, you do place in a curfew. What the argument was in which to lift that curfew is because a lot of the businesses, and I'll say, we really heard from Chez Vincent, the French restaurant, that they wanted to have more of the clientele that were coming in from the conferences. They wanted to go after some of that market. And we can all business-wise understand why, until COVID, but nevertheless.
Yeah.
Barbara, let me just clarify some language. There has not been a curfew. That's not the word that we should be using here. It was what time the restaurants closed. So when there was renovation of Hannibal Square in response to residents who had long lived there complaining about what was going on in one particular establishment, then Chez Vincent was the first restaurant that opened, and to protect in response to the residents, their closing hour was determined to be 11, and what they wanted and finally got was equity with Park Avenue. They didn't think it was fair that they had to close at 11 o'clock at night, but it was not a curfew. To me, a curfew means nobody can be on the streets. You have to be home, but it was simply what time the businesses had to close.
Okay, so I'm not sure how we want to, what term we would use if we're not using curfew, but
what time the closing hour was for the restaurants.
Okay. So as of last year, it was voted that the restaurants in Hannibal Square could stay open until 2 a.m. in which to conduct business. That is correct. And those are the same hours, I want to believe, as far as Orange County, for most of the business establishments in Orange County. That is correct. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you. Russell, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chandler, first of all, for being here. It's been quite an interesting conversation. I had two questions. Did I understand you to say to visit, we need to call and make an appointment? We can't just walk into the facility?
Due to COVID. Of course, COVID has now repositioned us, and it's actually working out really good, Russell, and I'll tell you why. It protects us health-wise. That's the number one reason. And it allows me, if there are questions that you, or conversations that you want to engage in one-on-one, it allows us to have the real conversation. A lot of times people in the past, prior to COVID, people walk in, they have a lot of questions that they would like to inquire, and depending on how many people are around, they're not always comfortable. I think the Heritage Center, we have positioned ourselves to be a space that people can feel comfortable with questions or inquiries, whether it's around race, whether it's around the direct situation in the community. So with our society and our community being so heightened, it actually works better that way. It does. So it protects us on the health level. And right now with the real conversations, it allows us to have that, if that's what a person so desires. In October, we will open for leisure for people to actually walk in Friday and Saturdays. So people will be able to walk in as they prior would Friday and Saturdays with proper COVID protocol, of course.
And Ms. Chandler, I had one other question. I was sad to hear about Warner Chapel, and I was wondering what the historic preservation situation is for buildings, and is Warner Chapel going to remain? Was it just another church that bought it out, or is it being torn down? And the same way with the other church, what is the situation with those two pieces of property?
Russell, I tell you, so wow. So when we found out, there was a community member here, LaWanda Thompson, her name, and LaWanda Thompson and I actually went and we approached the pastor at the time. And we were advocating for him not to sell. We even went to the Hannibal Square Land Trust with the intention to, if they're gonna sell, the land trust should be the one who tried to occupy that space. So this is, again, the pastor that was at the time, and I can't remember the name, he was young. When I say young, meaning no connection to the community. Let me say that.
He was new.
Yeah, pardon me? He was new. Yeah, he was new with no connection to the community, no understanding of why in this community you do not sell. So he didn't, I don't believe he had that full understanding.
Right.
In speaking with him, he stated that, you know, they were upside down and those kinds of things. And, you know, they did not have the congregation in terms of numbers, in terms of finance. So those kinds of things we know plays a large role. As far as preservation, Mr. Russell, there is none. And what I've learned, and Dr. Ruth, you can help me out here, or anyone who knows this area better, this preservation, in order to have your church or your home, it takes a person who knows what to do and how to do it. So once again, my thing is always to the appeal of the people in the community. Do they have the infrastructure? Is there an infrastructure that can help a church out to put them on the historic preservation so these things do not happen? So here we have a classic situation where there's a historic church. It's in Dr. McLeod's information as to when this church started, how it started, who were the founders. What do we do as a community in reaching out to a church in making sure they do not fall prey to what took place? How do we prevent this from happening? How do we provide them with the tools, the necessary tools that can, again, reduce the risk of this happening? Because right now we still have other churches that do not have any kind of historic preservation in place. So now the question becomes, how do we go about this? How do we make sure that each church has the tools, has the information in which they can preserve?
And let me add to that. There is one church on the National Historic Registry. I think they did it. It's Mount Moriah. And it actually happened as a result of Dr. Rebecca McLeod's research. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Smith Grant. The Smith Grant is a bequest from retired Rollins professors, it's got to be early 90s, to Olin Library and Winter Park Library to conduct research on Winter Park. Dr. McLeod received that grant in 2005, 2006, and she did research on the Black churches in Winter Park. as a result of that, like Barbara said, Mount Moriah was the first one established. Mount Moriah's physical structure, the building, is the original structure as it was built. And so it qualified to be on the National Register, Historic Register. There were a couple of the first 6 that are still in existence, but there were physical changes made, so they weren't able to do that. New Warner, which is the name of the last church that was sold, the original structure was Warner, and it was destroyed by termites. And so the new structure is New Warner, so it's not eligible for the National Historic Register. And I'm not familiar with the local historic registry to see what would need to go into that to help preserve it. But that's just to flesh that out a little bit. Because one of the first things that Black folks in that community did, Barbara, correct me if I'm wrong, when they established, they built churches.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. So also, Mr. Russell, to your question, we're unsure as residents, as community community members, as to what will happen to the church. And this now drives another point. How do we get our city government to advocate as to how these kinds of things happen? If I do believe if there was a more progressive form of government in place, I do not believe that we would see a church being sold just so directly out, especially knowing the history of this community. There's no safeguard for, there's no safeguard. I don't think that there's a safeguard that when a church or a resident runs into this kinds of situation on how to protect the structure, which protects the community, because again, it disperses. We're constantly dispersing the community to go worship outside, to go take our economics outside. So how do we put something into place that can help to preserve structures as well as the people?
I don't know if there's a difference in Orlando and Winter Park, you know, in regards to that sort of thing. But I recall there was that one building on Colonial Drive in Orlando where the sign was considered historic. And so they went to all these extents to preserve the sign. And I think they finally did come up with some agreement of how to preserve a couple of signs. So I don't know if that's because the city of Orlando has perhaps more stringent approach to historic structures and buildings in Winter Park or not. But so to your knowledge, though, were those 2 churches both, the plan is for them both to be torn down?
I'm sorry, Park? I didn't catch the last part.
Those 2 churches, Warner Chapel and the other church that you mentioned, is the plan for them to be torn down and the new buildings put in those places, or you don't know what's going to happen to them?
With Warner Chapel, I do not know. And with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I want to believe we may see that come down, if it's not down already. It's been a while since I've not driven back on that end, but I do believe because of how development is occurring, I do believe that we will see the Seventh-day Adventist Church, or what was, I do believe we will see that a removal of that if it has not been already. Warner Chapel, we are unsure of. We have seen activity, meaning people coming in and out of it look like they're working on it. I mean, I personally, spiritually, what else do you change a church into? What else do you turn it into? And still keep the integrity to the community members around. In that example you gave, Mr. Russell, as far as the sign and the city of Orlando, the community who was probably involved in working to preserve the sign. Remember, a community that has been weakened and does not have any political efficacy, little economic efficacy, it's hard to fight. It's hard to fight a structure that is so stabilized and seemingly pro-development to stop these charges, to stop what is unseemingly unreasonable, you know? So it's a tough charge when you don't have the infrastructure to support what should stay and what should not stay, what should remain. It's a really tough charge.
And let me ask you this, just from this perspective too. A lot of and it goes for the churches and for the community. A lot of folks, when their children graduated, the children went away.
That is correct.
To school and to create professional lives. Not many of them moved back. So they lost connection to the community. So a lot of the things that held early Winter Park, together, dissipated.
That is exactly right.
Know what it looks like in terms of.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And then I think the question then becomes, why haven't the children who are now adults returning to the community? Is it too expensive? Do they feel that the bigger cities have more to offer? So, it's like, what will make them return to a community such as Winter Park, where historically, and I think in any community, you live there, and then it's always like, oh, I can't wait to get out of here. Yeah. And then you leave, and then you say, hey, it's time for me to come back. It's time for me to add to my community. So the question now has to become, why aren't we seeing more of people returning into this community to once again lead the charge, or as you stated, to kind of have a resurgence of what was in place? Yeah, to recreate that. And I am guilty of being one of those who could not wait to graduate and get out of my parents' house. So I totally understand it. And also now going, ooh, I wish I would have been smart enough to say, let me snatch this little piece of something to go back to. So that's a whole other conversation. Yeah, we are down. We drank the Kool-Aid. We drank the Kool-Aid. It's better to go off. We drank the Kool-Aid. That Kool-Aid. So we have a couple of minutes left. Any other comments or questions for Barbara Ann?
I saw in the census, I think the 2010 census, that the current Black population of Winter Park is 7%. Do you know how that has changed since, say, 1965, since the 1960 census? Yeah, I mean, Florida is known as the Jim Crow South. So again, that oppression to want to leave where you can flourish, you will definitely see the drastic decrease in the numbers. And you are correct, because it's in the timeline. But once again, there's something about growing up in a community, even in the worst situations, that this community provides you with a sense of esteem, especially a very stabilized community like West Winter Park. A sense of esteem, a sense of community collaboration, where Ms. Johnson knows you, the values that you were taught, that you could go off. So I think, again, then there are those who stayed. The ones who stayed, you had those who left and migrated to the north, and then you had those who stayed. The ones who stayed, a part of them felt that they were driven out, the economic eviction. Again, whenever you see a decrease in a community, whether it's white flight or African Americans leaving to go to another area, that's almost because the community no longer feels like theirs. It's almost as though they don't feel as though their point of views or their cultural norms are being accepted in the greater region of the community. So therefore, what do? We all want to feel a sense of a familiar
We want to feel a sense of familiar. We want to feel a sense of belonging. And we want to, more than anything, feel accepted in our communities. It cannot be palatable to live in a community where you feel as though you're not seeing people in government who looks like you. You're not seeing people in the offices when you go in and you're, doing your exchanges that can relate to you. It begins to bring on a type of discomfort. It's a discomfort. And nobody wants to feel like they're living and paying taxes and working in a community that they don't feel that they can honestly contribute to. So therefore you will start to, and it feels strategic. So therefore you will start to see a decline in residency, in Black residency.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants to feel a part of the community. Nobody
Yeah.
wants to spend the majority of their time living in a community advocating for what they feel they should have.
Okay. And on that note, we have to wrap up because we're close. We're very close to end. We have like 2.5 minutes. Diana, am I looking at the clock? Does my clock have the right time?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have 2 minutes now.
Thank you.
So here's what I will.
Thank you for coming.
Please do appreciate
Thank you for having me.
being with us this evening. and
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Don, I think I've seen your face before. Have you been to the center?
Well, my wife has been to the center.
Yeah, I recognize you.
She reminded me that I have not.
He has not, but I have been.
But
And I think you came in around the quilting issue. Did you come in around quilting?
No, but I wish I had because I just finished a quilt.
Ah, okay.
No,
All right.
I came in with a group of maybe 6-8 months ago. We came in as a group, well, it was before the pandemic, came in with a group of ladies, then you gave us a tour.
Okay. I'm pretty good about faces.
you will be seeing more of me. I'll just tell you.
Excellent.
I've got a couple of readings I want to suggest for this group since you've heard Barbara's talk. In addition to taking advantage of the Friday, Saturday time when they'll be open and you can go visit the museum, I would also encourage you to go online at WPPL.org. It's the Winter Park Library's website, and go to the history section. And Dr. McLeod's work on the Black churches in Winter Park is digitized. You can actually read the book that gives you some insight on the Black churches in Winter Park as they were established. And maybe that's someone we can consider bringing for another talk, Diana. I'll just throw that out there. She is
I would love to do that. And I appreciate you coming, Barbara, and I appreciate you inviting her, Ruth. This was wonderful. Thank you.
so glad y'all enjoyed it.